Welcome to Who's On Next, the podcast that tastes great with a side of ginger ale. Today, I have with me a man whose career has spanned over 45 years. He's worked on things like Ninja Turtles. He's been the voice of Buzz Lightyear for Disney's theme parks. He was Bravestarr. It is Pat Fraley.
Well, hello, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing good. It's been.
Who cares? This is Krang. I still want to rule the world.
How
Hey,
are,
Mike.
how are you doing today?
Good. It's early. I'm in LA. It's just before 9, but all's good.
I'm doing good too. Like I said before we called or before we started, my dog was freaking out like 5 minutes before and he had to go out. And I'm like, no, because I know he's going to take like 10 minutes. I don't want to.
You know what? All precedent to kids and dogs. I have dogs barking, kids in pools. I'm in the neighborhood, and that's reality.
What is it that got you interested in acting?
Well, there's theories. I have theories. They all have to do with God. First, when I was 4 years old, I was performing, in army, and they wanted to shoot me because I died so good. But later on, I another theory was genes, and my mom was very encouraging, and she was very exaggerated because her father was the superintendent of deaf schools all her life. So she grew up around the deaf. She was very exaggerated and she was very encouraging, and also from grandfather. My dad had a work ethic and he liked me. He liked being around me because I was sort of like mom, I guess. And the third theory is that my parents were divorced when I was about 12. I was very lonely. I wanted attention. I helped my brother with his drama work in high school, my older brother. And when I got to the age of going to high school, I just wanted attention. I just wanted to be loved. And I went into drama and I got it. Later on, I realized I'd grown up my entire life in my career worshiping my creative ability, not me, but my creative ability. And that doesn't work. But it all turned out right. But there's 3 theories.
Well,
I don't think I had a choice. Let's put it that way.
and what is it that got you interested in voiceover in particular?
I was over in Australia. I had emigrated after I got my Master of Fine Arts from Cornell in acting. I was doing theater, and I think a producer said, "Oh, we like you." I was doing a commercial in a cartoon voice or a character voice, and I said, "Why?" Oh, and he said, "Oh, yeah, you're so big, we can't get the other actors to be that big." And I thought, well, there you are. I've struggled with exaggeration and being, very big all my life. Why don't I go back to LA, to New York, sorry, to the States, and go to Hanna-Barbera and do cartoon acting because they want exaggerated performers. And that's what I did.
And what was the first thing you did do? Because I saw a lot of additional voices credits very early on when I was looking.
I was a mall guard in everything. They used to tease me because I go, "Hey, you kids can't be in here. What the oh?" And you always got knocked out. The first thing I did, I think, was Scooby-Doo Goes Hollywood. And I was a mall guard in a Jimmy Cagney rat dog and a kid, guest shots. I was a guest at Hanna-Barbera in places for 3 years before I got a regular.
And I guess, like, when you were first starting out doing voiceover, was it like intimidating compared to doing on screen, or like did it take a while to learn to adjust to doing it?
Not really. I was around guys, the first generation of wonderful voiceovers, and they, I just thought the microphone was like a steel lollipop. It just caught you doing stuff. Well, they were using that mic going in on it. They'd go, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll tell you what, I'm here." They were using it, and I learned from them quickly. And for some reason, it was always more comfortable not being seen on stage or on camera. And so it was wonderful for me and not a big problem.
Because I've known people who started out doing on screen and they like fully transitioned into doing voiceover because they just preferred doing it. I think Frank Welker actually started out doing on screen, from what I
My first
recall.
job was with Frank, and he was on screen and Disney movies and stuff. And when I was very uncomfortable, I was the only guy wearing a tie, And he came up to me and said, "Hey, I like your voices. Why don't you hang out with me at the Comedy Store?" And I was so blessed by him. And I've known him all my life, my entire career, and he'd been going at least 10 years before, and he's my age. I'm 74. I think he's 76.
Right. It's one of those things where I've always found it so fascinating that some people will have this one big thing they commit to. They'll do on screen or they'll do stand up, and then they just find this one thing they love so much they commit to the other thing. Again, like voiceover.
Well, I'll tell you what, I thought I would do stand up because at my age, the only way to train to be an actor was theater, right? Or college and theater. I trained, and then voiceover came along, and I did it. Yeah, like everything else, I've been on camera, off camera, narrator, everything, and I was good at it. I was 30 years old when I hit LA after training and going to Australia, and people said, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" And I've done a TV show and I've done movies and stuff. I said, the reason I said I don't do stand up is because I have a wife and a living room. I made a living being a performer, so that was it for me, and I love it.
And what was the main reason you did go to Australia for a period?
Well, I went to an agent in New York right out of Cornell, and he said he looked at my resume, and get this, Michael, you don't hear this very often. Their agent went, "Well, you're light on Shakespeare." And I was light. And so I went over there and did Othello and Coriolanus. And I was ready to do theater because I thought I'd be a theater actor. It was all I had. There were no improv classes. There was no video was early, so that's all I could do. But then I kind of found out about voiceover and doing character voices on commercials, which was very popular then in the mid 70s.
I find it interesting because whenever I've done research on animation in Australia, it's not a big voiceover scene over there. They have it. They do have cartoons made there and they do have actors, voiceover actors. It's just not nearly as big as it is in a lot of other countries.
I don't know. I do know that a third of the actors work, and I emigrated literally because of the government. Mel Gibson and I were the only American actors there, and it might be smaller, but everything's smaller. But we all worked. A third? Are you kidding me? I think we have 10% in our SAG after union, but the union over in Australia was, well, we all worked.
And how many years were you in Australia?
About 2.5.
Okay. So it wasn't a super long period of time over there to come back to
No,
America.
by the time I got over there and got working, had my own theater company. I was in the State Theater of South Australia. I did a lot. I went to Penang, Malaysia, and worked in a play. By the time I did all that, I really progressed. I found out my style early on, exaggerated, big. And so that's when I came back to LA or to Seattle, my hometown, and moved down, got married and moved down to LA. So I was very fortunate that I understood what I was early on.
Well, and from what I saw when I was looking up stuff, you had a one-man show at one point, from
Yeah.
what it sounded like. And what was that like?
I'd gone about 10 years doing cartoons, and my mind was like malto meal. I went to a guy, a mentor of mine. I said, I have no brain. And he said, do a show and take it to college campuses. And I created a show and was directed and did that and went to all sorts of different campuses and would present it against what they paid me. I gave them the gate, the money, and I taught. And I enjoyed it. It was an era of my life.
And was that like Was that more like an improvisational show, or was it like multiple characters, or what was the main basis around it?
It was a scripted show about my life as a voiceover talent, going through high school and college, and it was humorous, and where how I became an actor, and it was called I think Loose and Loud, and how I became loose and loud, and how I made a living.
And how long did you do that?
I don't know. I kept it for about, I think about 4 years, 3 years, and went to different campuses.
And that was in the 90s? Or was that in like the late 80s?
Yeah, I think so. I went to Little Rock, University of Arkansas, Whitman, Susquehanna, all sorts of places, and would teach acting, and then I would do my show.
Yeah, because I know there's a few voice actors that I think double down as teachers, because I know Barry Gordon does that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I believe
work with Barry quite a bit.
I believe he does. I know Peter Weller does too. That's like the first. Those are like the first two I know off the top of my head that do teaching.
Peter who?
Peter Weller, the RoboCop.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'll tell you what. I've always had a gift to teach and to perform and teach, and I've always had a passion for both, and I've done both my whole career.
Did teaching come after you had started doing voiceover, or was it actually before that?
No, really. I went to Australia, and I was a member of a theater rep company, and also the head of a theater. Wow. So it was from the get-go. In fact, I was teaching early on.
I guess one of the things I'd also been interested in, because you also do audiobooks.
Yes.
And I guess, is the audiobook process different from doing animation?
It's less absurd, or I did Huck Finn, so it was very big, and I was very good at it because I was used to, burlesque, big things. But generally, the style of acting is less, and there's particular skills you bring to the party that generate from acting. It really is performing, and that's giving the impression you have no text, no copy, no script. When I listen to a good narrator, I'm not aware of a book. And so I enjoyed it, although I've been very selective and not done much for a long time because I don't like to use rude words or have a subject matter that is inappropriate to me.
Do they, I've actually never known, do they do audition processes for audiobooks?
Well, sorta. But not per se. They do a little bit, not like the other genres.
Because I've known some people that have made it out to be where it sounds like there's a few people that come in and read, or it's like the agency will like pick things from different companies and they'll just send you off to go do it.
Well, there's both kinds. There's all kinds. There's auditions. You're the guy. Would you like to do this book? My friend Scott Breck doesn't audition anymore. He's just, would you like to do this book? Yes or no. And so it's all over the place, kind of like movie acting, where they say, we have a movie for you, Burt Reynolds, that, or you audition with 500 other people.
And do you have to read the book beforehand?
Yes, okay. Always. Always be aware of what you can't tell a story unless you know it. Now, Scott Brick has someone make notes for him because he can't read a whole book. But most people, they read the book. You got to know who did it, so you can hide it or reveal it. And so, yeah, you do. You rehearse.
And I guess like with the transition with doing voiceover in the 80s, because the 80s was one of the biggest periods for franchise work in terms of animation, because it was G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Transformers, He-Man, just like every big franchise was starting in the 1980s.
I'll tell you what happened, Michael. It's very interesting. In the 80s, there was there was a Channel 11 and 13s, which were syndicated. There weren't other channels. Okay. So we used to do 13 shows a year, Scooby-Doo 13 and reruns all year. It was like cherry picking. You worked from May to maybe June or July. That was it. But then He-Man came out and just murdered them from Filmation on numbers because they were Monday through Friday. They weren't Saturday morning. So the buy went from 13 to 65 episodes. And, no one ever paid any money. They went to 13s and 12s and said, how would you like to have G.I. Joe? Oh, yeah. Okay, we'll trade you time. So they got $250,000 a show, but they traded time. And then they went to other people, advertisers, and made money with their time.
Yeah, and it's just so crazy to think that like so many. For me, it's just with the '80s. It's so crazy to see how many big things started in such a short period of time. Because
Oh yeah, Neil Ross, a buddy of mine, we were doing a show at Filmation, and I had 2 or 3 shows a week, different shows. I thought it was bank. I said, "How you doing?" He goes, "Well, I don't know what to do. I've got 9 shows." I said, "You got to make a cassette and remember what you did." I mean, one day I went out and I did Smurfs. I had a voice like that. And I had one like the Littles, and he's a turtle, and wow, whoa, and some other. It was the same voice. ABC, NBC, CBS. They were so busy they never watched each other's shows. There were only 20 of us in the early '80s that could do, many different characters.
Well, because it was another thing where you look at those casts and it was a lot of the same people jumping around.
Yeah.
Because Frank and Peter and just tons of people were all jumping back and forth doing the same thing.
Michael Bell, Dawes, but there were Neil Ross. There were about 20 of us that could do lots of characters.
Alan Oppenheimer.
Yeah, Al's still around too.
Yeah, I met him a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful guy.
Yeah,
I learned a lot from him.
I met him a few years ago at a convention. I have a sketch. It was like a pre-inked cell from He-Man of Skeletor, and I got him to sign it.
Yeah, he does real well at those, and he's in his early 90s.
I think he's 93, 94 or something like that.
I think you gotta be, I came down, I didn't come down for the palm trees. I lived in some of the most beautiful places in the world, or been there. Nepali Coast, Tahiti, Penang, Malaysia. But I came to LA because that's where they did cartoons. Now they do them in different places, so it's a little different, but still, it's a mecca.
Oh, yeah, no, it's like now, I think Disney has studios all over the world. They had a studio in Australia making things for American audiences. They've had stuff in Europe. They license things out now from other companies. But with stuff going on in the 80s, that brings us to Ninja Turtles. And Ninja Turtles is now, I think, going on 5 or 6 TV shows now.
Yeah, yes. It changes with the culture. We started about 86 and at 9 years. And then there were different casts. And you know what, Mike, get this. We thought, we're ahead. We just made a lot of money. We did a lot of shows. It turns out we were only selling toys. The toy company, to this day, is the producer of that show.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because I know He-Man was, I think, a similar situation where they had the toys, and then to sell the advertisers, they made the show for the toys.
Yeah, that it was folly for Bravestarr because we opened the show in the movie before. No, the toy was on the shelves before the show was out. They had no idea what it was, and so it just went down.
On Netflix, they have a show called The Toys That Made Us, and I remember when they were talking about when He-Man was created, they were going to make a comic, and then the toy company had said, well, what if a kid can't read? So then they said, okay, we'll make a show, and then they made a show for He-Man, and they just did everything to sell the toy.
Yeah, well, when Tim Allen was very busy doing his show on TV and touring, I did Buzz Lightyear for about 9 years. And it was all about the toy, because it was the most highly franchised toy in the history of Disney.
Yeah, I actually had a Buzz and a Woody when I was like 4 or 5. So I don't I think it had a voice. I don't remember if it did. It was probably your voice. That's the thing.
Well, my boys used to go to the toy store and to the toy store, and they push the button on Buzz Lightyear's, and they go, "Mr. Allen, Mr. Allen, Dad, Dad." I did about 12 of them.
Yeah, because I think like the more toy accurate size one, the one that was like a foot tall, like a foot and a half, something like that. And I don't, again, I want to say it had voice when you hit the buttons, but I don't remember.
Probably.
Was there like, because I know the Buzz Lightyear of Star Command cartoon was in the early 2000s. And
Yeah.
was that a thing? Did you audition for that, or did they treat that like a separate
Well,
thing?
I did. Pat Warburton did it.
Yeah.
What they wanted, what Disney wanted, and I was in the middle of doing Buzz Lightyear for toys. I decided to go classic, even when they asked for something a little different, because if I got cast in that, I wouldn't have the run of doing toys and doing a sound alike. So yes, that happened, and I think that only lasted one season of 65.
Yeah, that 90s to like early 2000s period was
Yeah,
basically everything was like 50 episodes. Like they even if it
60,
yeah,
65.
yeah, it was like a 60 or 50 episode show cuz I remember a lot of shows back then got killed because of syndication.
Well, the syndication was 11 and 13s. When it went to channels, and I can't think of the name, Boomerang is one,
Yeah.
then we made a bad deal on with the union, and I still get residuals for everything I've ever done. I've been in the union since '76, but they're very modest
Cuz I remember
payments.
learning a lot of shows on Nickelodeon back then were like gutted after 52 episodes. Even if the show was popular, they basically were like, "Oh, well, this is the 52's the amount where now we can just run this as much as we want and not have to make any more." Like,
Well, that didn't happen so much. That happened once in a while, but we'd get one or two or keep going like G.I. Joe for years. And it was 65 because 65 is a quarter Monday through Friday. And really, that was the traditional 65.
hey, because if I remember, was Ninja Turtles was Saturday, and I think then it became syndicated.
It was unusual because it was the first show that ever went syndicated while it was on network and went European at the same time.
Yeah, because I think it also changed. I think it changed channels when it went syndicated. I think that was the other thing when it happened.
Well, syndication was 11 and 13s, and then there was ABC or NBC or CBS.
And I guess with I guess like back on the 80s period with Ninja Turtles, what was did you start out doing Krang like you how
No,
you
it was the director had cast himself in four major roles and done the pilot on a Saturday, and that really irritated Fred Wolf, the producer, because Fred Wolf was, shall we say, very frugal. It was more, and so I came in on an audition and got it, and had to turn down one of the four roles. I said I can't do that many because Fred didn't have guests for years. That's why we all got good at doing things. If you remember, Barry Gordon and Cam Clark had Rocksteady and Bebop, and Rob Paulson got to do a gangster. He's a very high tenor, but he would do them like that. You know, he learned. We all learned how to do things and be very versatile early on in Ninja Turtles.
yeah because you were also Baxter and Casey Jones slash and a few other characters. Now was that a thing where they would just ask you if you could do another character or
Well,
like
they didn't ask you if you could do it. We in those days it was three characters for the price of one contract. If you did four characters, you got two contracts. So we'd get two characters, and they'd say, "Who's light on a character?" would have to raise their hands. Come here. They'd show us a picture of, say, Casey Jones and say, you'll do that guy. And I'll go, well, what do I do? And they went, give me a young Clint Eastwood. Hello, Violator. Or Slash. They show me a picture of Slash and say, okay, you're doing this guy. He's crazy. Well, he had splayed out teeth. So I first kind of did Kirk Douglas because he's kind of insane when he did certain roles. And then he gave him big teeth. So he sounded like that. So we had to work fast.
No, because I'm trying to even remember who had the most. Because I know everybody, I think, had at least like 5 recurring roles, or at least like guest
they
one-offs.
said somebody said I had 52 characters. Well, they said I've done 50,000 characters. Well, guess what? I've been at Denny's and had 50,000 pancakes, all mediocre. So it's not the amount, but nevertheless, I did a lot of work for them, for other people. I was known as a versatile actor.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, the 3 who had the most were you, Townsend, and Pete Renaday. Those were like the 3 most recurring.
I was Byrne, Krang, Bravestarr, and another one. And I said I can't do Vernon and Byrne. I got to be the boss. And so Pete Renaday got it. And he was the funniest guy. We all laughed at him the entire 9 years. He was terrific.
Yeah, because I see, Townsend technically had 5, but I guess he replaced James Avery for 1 episode for Shredder, from what I'm seeing.
He replaced me. I've teased him to death because I went to Hawaii on vacation. I used to do the shows for Krang in Hawaii, but that year Fred decided to get somebody else, and Townsend did probably the best I've ever heard.
Say, because let's see, Rob had 6, Cam had 5, Jim Cummings came in and had 3.
They weren't in each show.
Yeah,
it was very rare, but I would have Krang, Byrne, and maybe Baxter until I killed him after the first year, and then I would do other characters. And so a lot of those characters you bring up came up later.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, in looking at the list of characters listed, because I know they all showed up. I know Casey, I don't think, showed up till like season 2 or 3, from what I recall. I know Baxter showed up really early on. I think he was like episode 3 of the original show.
He was actually in the first episode.
Okay.
And they killed him off.
Now, when you did Baxter, because Baxter started out with a different voice, and then when he became the Fly, he had a much more high-pitched voice.
Well, Baxter was a scientist,
yeah.
And when he became a Fly, and you can't see this, but I'm wiggling my throat with my finger, so I became Baxter. So I was more like a fly.
And with the 2012 show, they had a lot of the original cast come back for the CGI show. And I guess, what was that like coming back to do that character again after so many years?
Well, it was like putting on an old suit you'd worn for 9 years. It was easy as pie. I mean, when I did Krang, you're talking about Krang, right?
Yeah.
I used to throw my neck out. I'd come home from vacation and do a show, and I move around a lot when I perform, and I'd snap my neck out twice. I wasn't used to how I protected myself. But later on, oh my goodness, I could do it in my sleep,
And did you all record together for that, or was it?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
We were all in the same room. That was when I sat next to Rob Paulson for 9 years, and my job was only to make him laugh. When I made him laugh, I knew I was good, doing well.
Right, because I know James Avery passed away several years ago, and was he? He's the one where I've heard inconsistent stories where he was with the group sometimes, or he wasn't with the group most of the time.
He was most of the time with the group. Then he went to Fresh Prince in Bel Air and left the show, and we had different shredders that came in.
Yeah, because
and then he died much later on.
Yeah. Because he died, I think, 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years ago this year. Because it was like, he had 5 replacements. Because I think it was Townsend did it once, Jim Cummings did it a few times, Dorian Harewood I think did it once, and
Bill Martin did them too.
yeah, Bill I think was the last season when they did it, when he came back the final time. I've always thought with shows like He-Man and Transformers and things like that, it's probably that era where everybody got to do so many characters on one show, which I know they still do, but whenever I look at shows during that period, it just amazes me seeing so many people do like 10 characters. Like
Well,
recurring.
I don't know about 10, not per show. It was like 3 characters per show because it was the same price.
Oh yeah.
The funny part was, I'll tell you a funny story. I was doing Centurions with Neil Ross and guy that did Ben Casey, Vince Morrow. And they said, who's letting the contract? I said, I am. And Michael Hack, who was directing it, said, you're Dr. Wu. I said, I don't do an Asian. And they, well, you do now. And it was the only Asian I knew was Japanese. And he was very loud. Dr. Wu, Mr. Fraley, stand be ready. So I went in there and did Dr. Wu, and people got so tired of it that they'd leave. All the actors would leave the studio while I did Dr. Wu. It was so bad.
I guess if you can recall voiceover wise, what was one of the most difficult characters to play? I guess one that really stretched your range or was just much different compared to a lot of other things you'd done?
It's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. I know that I have my favorite 3 voiceover work. When you want to hear those?
Sure.
Okay, the first is for money was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And really, Krang was the strangest voice I've ever done in my life. And I think it's a record. It's stranger than any other voice ever. And then for Critical Ability, The Adventures of Huck Finn, the audiobook, great reviews. And then also Talespin, because I did Wildcat, which was the sidekick to Baloo. And he was sort of like, Baloo is a adventure banana, I forgot. Oh, look, there's a new island on the map. No, it's guacamole. A very silly character. Well, about 20 years after I did it, I got a call from a psychologist in New York and said, would you take a call from an autistic patient I have? I said, yeah. Well, she loved, I still communicate with her years later because she loved Wildcat. He was a challenged character that everyone loved.
I never even really viewed him like that when I would watch the show. I think it was also just there were so many characters back then who just kind of had the Pete Puma-ish kind of voice that I just never really viewed the character like that.
I actually, Mike, I don't think of him as difficult as unusual. Yes, Krang was, in fact, the weirdest thing I ever did. It wasn't difficult. I also did a cock on the Tick. I did a Bosnian cowboy candy machine. Also, I did a hippie Native American.
I remember Carpet Man. That was one. That's like the most distinct Tick character I think I remember when I looked at your filmography. Was the Static Cling Carpet Man who just had shag carpet all over him.
Yeah, I remember there was an ad lib where Rob Paulson was doing a character and said, he said, well, why don't you just take off the costume? Talking about Carpet Man. And Carpet Man responded and said, you don't understand. Without the uniform, I'm nothing.
That's such a great show. I love that, The Tick.
Yes, that was the funniest show I ever did. Very, very funny. Ben Ingman, I think, created it. And he had an opening title that was a white guy doing scat singing. Boo boo, ba ba da ba ba boo. And I said, where did you ever come up with that? It was like a foreign movie. And he said, well, I dreamt it.
I was thinking one of the things I've always loved about every Tick show is that like the creator of the Tick is like always super heavily involved in all those shows.
Oh yeah, he did 4 or 5 titles on every show.
Yeah. I've always found that because you never see that with comic book things very often, where the creator has a lot of creative control over the show.
Yeah, he was used a lot. In fact, he was the Tick for one show. He tried. I tried. Then Townsend got it and was so wonderful.
I remember it's been almost 10 years. I interviewed Townsend a long time ago. I really need to interview him again. But I remember we had this great thing happen because he had this Tick action figure, this talking Tick that he had. And I remember he was like showing it off. And the call cut out at one point when he was talking about it. And I was like, oh, God, no, don't let my internet die. And he came back like 10, 15 seconds later. And I've kept this moment because it's like one of my favorite things that ever happened in an interview was he came back and he was like, what happened? And I was like, oh, the internet cut out. So no, it's fine. It's just a glitch in Skype. And he was like, evil glitch. I am the Tick. It's like one of my favorite things that's ever happened in like any interview I've done.
Wonderful guy to work with.
Another thing I've always been curious about is that you've done creature or animal noises a few times, like Denver the Last Dinosaur.
Yeah.
Aliens that don't speak English, things like that. And I guess Bob,
in Men in Black, I was Worm Guy 1 and 3, and Bob the Twin. And Bob the Twin would go.
How do you direct that? How do you direct a character that doesn't speak English?
You're not. In fact, on Denver the Last Dinosaur, when I auditioned, I got the role, and they wanted a big sounding voice. I had, no, look at his head. You got a wowie chip. Well, it turned out that I had to do my work because I had no lines off the storyboards. I'd see what he's doing, and then I'd ad-lib or put in some sound.
Yeah, because animal noises and creature noises are always like the thing that fascinate me because especially when they try to make them a character even though they can't speak. And I just always wonder what direction is for things like that.
Well, they'll give you the intent and then you do it. I mean, there's about Jim Cummings is a good one. So does D something. I can't think of his last name. D. Baker is wonderful. And I cast both those guys in a show that called for just sounds. I remember a video game.
Have you done voice direction?
Well, I'm not a very good director. I have done it, but you know, I'm mediocre at directing. I'm wonderful at guiding. When I teach, and patfraley.com has all what I teach and free lessons, and my contacts are up to date. I guide people into doing skills, either hone the skills they have or new skills. But I don't direct because directing is, you know, they'll say, yeah, do it again, but on the moon. I mean, yeah, I don't do well with direction, but guiding I do.
Yeah, because I've spoken to a couple people who've done voice direction before, and I've just always wondered what the transition from being a voice actor to voice directing is. Like, do you just ask, or do they like want you to do it themselves?
Well, I had an opportunity to start, but Sue Blue did it and did it well, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah, because I've never really understood the transition, really. Because I know some people, it's like in the anime industry, a lot of those people will double down. They'll do like multiple things. They'll write, voice act, or they'll direct and voice act.
Right.
Or they'll edit. Like they just do a bunch of things at once.
Sure. I don't know. It's like the inside of a toilet. I don't know what a cistern is either. I get a plumber.
Well, and I guess because Box Trolls was another one with like a lot of creature noise things or characters kind of speaking English, kind of gibberish-ish.
Yeah, that was a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And was that another thing where they would just kind of give you an idea of what to do, or?
I did Sweets in another character, and I didn't have I had 2 lines at the end to pay off the whole movie. I can't remember. I do know that they just let me go, and they would give me the intent of the line, like, "Oh, this is okay. You're in a nice situation," and I go, "Wow, what's new?" Part of the skill set is not having a lot of brains, and I'm great at that. I was gifted all the way through college and auditioning for a Cornell and the MFA program. If they said, be a Frankenstein monster, now you're a mattress, now you're a rocking chair, I had no difficulty with motivation. I just became it. So I never had a problem trying to think, okay, now if I were a rocking chair, what would I be like and why? Didn't have that.
I remember I did improv classes for a bit, and I have a much easier time doing improv with a group, but like when it's just private. I don't know. When you put me in front of like 50 people, that's when I'm like, ugh.
Well, I'll tell you what, improv, I always thought, well, that's very good because it'll teach you to be on top of your game and just but what it does is teaches you the importance, the value of story. Story is fundamental to everything we do, and fundamental to story is conflict. If there's not a conflict, you don't have a story. So you always go for a conflict or implied conflict.
I say, 'cause improv to me can be like one of the funniest things on the planet, because I always think back to Robin Williams, because a lot of his stand-up was improv, or he would have the basic idea of what he wanted to talk about. I don't like improv can be the funniest thing on the planet to me.
Well, next time you watch somebody who does a lot of improv, look at how they work conflict. And the funniest improv is a conflict between two things that don't belong. Like if I had said to you, do a New York tough scene, only there's a stopwatch. So you take those two aspects and you make a conflict within that. And that's what's funny. That's what tells a story. The funny part is a stopwatch in a New York gang.
I've always heard like mixed opinions from improv comics about like whose line is it anyway, and things like that. Because I've seen some people say they don't like it, and I've seen some improv people say they love whose line. So I've never really known the mass consensus, because I personally love whose line is it anyway.
Wayne Brady and the other guys, they're so good at coming up with something funny based on that. So there's the premise and there's improv skills, creating stuff off the top of your head. They combine. That's what Robin Williams was so good at. He would do, he'd have a concept that was silly, and then he'd realize it wasn't just improv.
Well, no, it was like it was like a bit plus a story. Like he would make an entire comedy bit just out of a story he was telling.
Right.
And I guess like a thing I wanted to ask, because I've always been curious about this when I talk to people, is if you could play a character again, like a character you haven't played in a very long time, like what character would you want to play?
Well, I liked Wildcat because they let me do what I wanted to do. And I was really off the top of my head with that character, and I ad-libbed a lot. And so I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed doing Bob the Twin. Things where I didn't get a lot of direction. I just were delighted with what I came up with.
I know with the because they did a reboot of DuckTales several years back, and they had Talespin characters. And I know there's been rumors. I know they said they were talking about doing a Darkwing Duck show. There's been rumors that they might do a Talespin show. And even if, like, you wouldn't be able to come back to do Wildcat, would you want to come back? Like,
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, very few voiceover people have any opportunity to say no. We just do everything. I've done the worst shows and the best shows. And I actually was a cast member of Little Clowns from Happy Town, the worst show ever created.
I've never even heard of that. Little
That's
clown.
good.
Little clown from Happy Town.
Little Clown, something like that.
I need to look this up. Yeah, Little Clowns of Happy Town,
Yeah.
1987.
Fortunately, I was a villain with Charlie Adler, but it was a horrible show.
Yeah, 18 episodes, ran 7 months. Yeah, I've never even heard of this.
Good.
Howard Morris. Chuck Lorre. That's
Writer.
Yeah. I just saw he created it. That's another thing, because I've talked to some people about like their least favorite role, or like what was a thing they did not like doing. I'm assuming that was probably your least favorite thing you did.
No, I liked being a villain, but the show stunk. I mean, I actually heard Lucy Taylor and Katie Lee and all these little cute Susan Blue. Somebody in the cast said, "I want a hug, and I want a hug right now." Oh my goodness, But I did a usual villain or some kind, like Rainbow Bright was kind of a bad show, but I played Lurky, a real stupid villain, along with Peter Cullen, who did Murky, and I loved it. Had a good time. I've had a good time on everything.
It's like, because I remember, I think Maurice LaMarche ages ago talked about, because what you had brought up with this clown show reminded me of a thing he talked about of like his least favorite thing. Because I think he was on a show called Popples. And I remember he said it was the worst thing he ever did, because he talked about how he wanted to make it more cynical, or he wanted to actually have fun. But it was a show like that, like the cutesy character loves each other, like no conflict kind of show. And I think he had said that was like the worst show he ever worked on, because he hated playing a character like that.
Well, there's nothing I hated, because I don't have any critical ability. Later I can say this or that, but while I do it, I'm infused with joy.
So has there never really been a show, I guess like a character or a show, where you just didn't really have a great time with it, or something where looking back on it, you're just like, ugh?
I don't have any of anything. Even the bad shows later on, I don't know, that wasn't very good, or that was good, or whatever. I don't care. I couldn't afford to care. I know some voiceover actors that horrible time doing a show because it was a bad show. Or a bad episode,
Yeah.
But I didn't care.
I think it was Rob Paulson that said, "I don't care as long as the check clears." Something.
That's exactly how I felt. We still call Brad Garrett, who's my buddy. We still call him Young Rob, because he's younger than we are.
Well, and you were friends with Ed Asner, wasn't he your neighbor for a period of time?
Yeah, he was a dear friend, close, probably as close as I've ever had to somebody in show business.
Yeah, because I remember reading like just random fun fact, voice actor fun fact, like Ed Asner lived next to Pat Fraley, the voice of Krang. Like
he lived across the street, and the way we met was very funny. Renee, my wife, said someone's aerosoled something on Ed's door. Ed was out of town. He had a red door right across the street. It was Ozzie and Harriet's original home in Studio City. And they put a skull and crossbow with "Kill Jews."
Oh.
And so I took a rag and kerosene and wiped it off. And of course, the neo-Nazis went to the phone booth and called ABC, NBC, CBS, and we'd laugh because all the trucks went by and they couldn't see it. So there was no story, because Ed was big news then as far as being left-wing. And he came over the next day, and I'd met him before, garbage and stuff, but he didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was. And he said, "You're the guy that took that message off my door." I said, "Yeah, kill Jews." He goes, "Well, I just wanted to thank you." I said, "Are you kidding me? I didn't want the neighbors knowing I lived next to a Jew." And he laughed. I hit his tickle bone. And from then on, we became dear friends. We did everything together, including plays, movies, cartoons, everything. And then we'd present everything.
Was it? What was the reason that that happened exactly?
What happened?
Oh, the kill all Jews
Oh,
thing.
well, the neo-Nazis, Ed was big news for being left wing. So he was adversity with the right wing neo-Nazis, number one, right? So they were after him. But then there were other people to go after later on when he got older.
That's so bizarre. And when was that? Was that 80s, 90s?
80s.
Okay.
Wait, yeah, 83, something like that. Early.
I guess like before we close this out, is there any advice you can give to people who are interested in going into the acting profession?
Yeah. It's Steve Martin's advice to young actors who ask, how do I get ahead? And Steve would say, well, they want me to talk about what's an agent, get a manager, this and that. But I always gave them the same advice and they never took it. The advice is get really good. If you're good, they'll come to you to get you. You won't have to audition. They just want you. And especially the best. I remember once I heard John Malkovich, the actor, respond to a question, how many auditions have you done? And John Malkovich said, one. I went, one? My God, then thousands. Well, he was that good early on. He's the reason why we know how to pronounce Malkovich. It's like Renee Zellweger. She worked from the get-go, even in Texas, because she was interesting. And so I say, get good. I came to town to LA when I was 30. I had gone through, I had AA, a BA, a MFA. I had experience in Australia, everything. And so I came down prepared. And I had money. So I didn't have to wait tables. I could just go out to lunch with the guys and they thought I was working. I wasn't, but I got a reputation of being good and available.
All right. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking your time to come out and do this interview.
My pleasure, Michael. So long for now.